In this session, let us discuss the various secondary factors which influence the location of the firm. In the previous session, we discussed the meaning of location, the factors influencing the location of the firm. We saw that the factors influencing location of the firm can be divided into two heads: primary factors and secondary factors. We studied the various primary factors in the last session, which included five important factors, namely access to raw materials, access to market, availability of labor, proximity of cheap fuel and power, and the last one being transport facility. In this session, let us take in detail the various secondary factors which have an influence in deciding the location of the firm. Secondary factors include various factors like financial services, climate factors, personal factors, external economies, momentum of an early start, historical factors, political stability, special concessions and benefits, and strategical considerations. Now, let us take one by one and study in detail how these factors will have an influence on location of the firm. The first one, availability of financial services. An important factor which influences the location of the plant is the availability of financial facilities. Adequate finance is required for the purpose of carrying out the business activities successfully. But capital being more and more mobile, nowadays location of an industry may not be rigidly influenced by the availability of finance in an area. Finance can be brought from other areas to locate the industries in a region otherwise deemed suitable. There are various sources of finance available to a firm, which can be classified into internal sources and external sources. The main internal sources include retained earnings, sale of fixed assets, and management of working capital. The important sources under external financing includes issue of shares, it may be equity or preference shares. The firm can go for debt financing, that is issue of debentures. The firm can avail loan from commercial banks or financial institutions. If it is a new business, then the firm can go for venture capital. It can opt for leasing or factoring. Thus, the firm has various internal and external sources of finance to carry on its business operations. Hence, nowadays we can say that availability of financial services though influences the location of the firm, but it can be managed as capital has become more and more mobile in the today's world. Now coming to the second factor, climate factors. Suitable climate is an additional factor influencing the location of industrial firms. Some of the most important climate factors that are to be considered are the level of the ground, topography of the region, drainage facilities, water facilities, disposal of waste product, so on and so forth. Now let us take an example. In case of cotton textile industry, humid climate provides an additional advantage. Therefore, Mumbai in Maharashtra, Coimbatore in Tamil Nadu, and Manchester in London with humid climate are suitable for cotton textile units. The topography of a region leads to a reduction in the transportation cost. So, it must also be taken into consideration. Similarly, if the steady supply of water is required for any manufacturing process, such industry or firm must be located where water is abundantly available. Hence, climate factors should also be considered as it has its influence on location of industries. Coming to the next secondary factor, that is personal factors. Personal factors also influence location of industry. Sometimes locations are the result of personal factors. An entrepreneur may have personal preference towards certain localities. Such personal preferences may be of a love for the hometown, a desire to develop his native area, or such similar reasons. Let's take for an example, Mr. Ford started the manufacture of motor cars in his hometown, Detroit. But this kind of location is generally rare in reality. Now, coming to the next factor, external economies. External economies also do influence location of industry. External economies are those economies which arise out of the growth of some specialized subsidiary activities. For instance, if a large number of industrial units engaged in the same line of activity are located in a particular area, that can be an additional encouragement for the new entrepreneur to start their industrial units in that particular area. The next factor which we are going to discuss is momentum of an early start. Momentum of an early start have an influence on industry location. Once an industry has been started in a particular area and it has been successful, the business people develop a sort of attachment to that area. Consequently, other units are attracted towards that area. Subsidiary units and other servicing units also group up. All these factors give momentum to the growth of new industries in such an area. The next secondary factor is historical factors. Historical factors also have an influence on the decision of location of firm. Historical factors in many cases lead to the development of a place as the center for an industry. For instance, in India, industries have flourished in Kanpur, arid Mumbai because of historical coincidence. Mumbai being the first city in India for business, and it has been continued till now. So, historical factors also to be considered while finalizing the location of industry. The next secondary factor to be considered here is political stability. Political stability plays a very important role in deciding the location of industry. Political stability also exerts considerable influence in selecting the location of industries. The lack of political stability of the state will adversely affect the industries located there. Further, it must also be considered whether the labor market is not, whether it is under the control or not of the trade unions. In fact, many industries are moving from West Bengal and Kerala only due to the adverse trade union activities prevailing in those states. Hence, political stability plays a very important role in location of industry or firm. The next secondary factor to be considered here is special concessions and benefits. Special concessions and benefits influence industry location. Various assistance given by the government in order to encourage the industrialists to set up their industries in certain areas also play an important role while selecting the location of industries. For example, establishment of units in backward areas. The government encourages establishment of units, industrial units, firms to be set up in backward areas. In order to do so, the government gives or announces various concessions and benefits so that the backward area can convert into developed area. It is also necessary to have balanced regional development. We have seen that there are certain areas which are completely developed, while there are also certain areas which are totally backward. In order to bring a balance in these areas, in terms of development, government takes certain steps so that even the backward areas are developed. Further, most of the state governments in India are offering various incentives for the rapid industrialization of that state by encouraging the setting up of industrial units. These incentives include subsidies, tax concessions, transport facilities, financial assistance, so on and so forth. The last factor which we need to consider here is strategical considerations. Strategical considerations are another factor which exert a greater influence on locational decisions. During periods of war, the air attacks would be aimed at the places where the defense materials producing factories are located. Hence, such industries must be located at a place where there is a remote chance for air attacks. Such industries must be protected, must be kept in safe. Hence, these considerations should also be taken while locating the firm. So, these are the various factors. To sum up, all the factors which we have discussed today as important factors responsible for the location of an industrial unit do not remain important at all times. A factor which is considered as more important at one point of time may lose its importance at another point of time and vice versa. Hence, the entrepreneur must take into consideration all the factors and analyze its extent of influence and select a suitable location. So, in today's session, we discussed the various secondary factors which influence location of the firm. So the factors which influence the location of the firm had been classified into primary and secondary factors. Primary factors being discussed in the last session. Today we discussed the secondary factors. In the next class, we shall take up the sources of capital. These books can be referred for the further studies. Thank you.